Ask most people to name royal family properties and they'll give you the obvious ones. Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, maybe Kensington Palace if they follow royal news. That's 5, maybe 6 properties. The public portfolio. Here's what they won't tell you. The Windsor family controls over 30 properties across Britain. Castles, mansions, estates spanning hundreds of thousands of acres. Properties worth billions of pounds, and most of them you've never seen inside. Many you've never even heard of. Some are officially private, though maintained through complex financial arrangements. Others are crown property, but leased to family members under terms that often remain confidential. The costs are distributed across multiple funding streams. The true scale of the property empire is rarely discussed as a whole. Why? Because looking at them collectively raises uncomfortable questions. Questions about cost during a housing crisis. Questions about why one family needs 30 properties. Questions about who really pays for all of this. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented fact, spread across official reports and public records. The properties exist. The funding mechanisms exist. And there are reasons, very specific reasons, why you rarely see them discussed together. Drop a comment. Did you know the royal family had this many properties? And if you want more investigations into what the powerful prefer not to discuss, subscribe. These stories don't tell themselves. Let's start with the one property every Brit knows exists, but almost nobody has actually seen. Sandringham House. The £200 million Christmas tradition. Every Christmas, the news shows the same shots. The royal family walking to church at Sandringham, smiling, waving, looking appropriately festive. The message is clear. Normal family, normal Christmas, just like yours. Except it's not remotely normal. Because behind those brief photo opportunities lies a 20,000-acre estate that the public rarely sees in full. A property purchased privately in 1862. A working agricultural business, shooting estate, and royal retreat that generates income through farming, forestry, and limited tourism. All privately owned by the monarch, separate from the crown estate. The house itself sits at the heart of an 8,000-hectare estate. The Sandringham estate includes 6,400 hectares of farmland, 1,400 hectares of woodland, and 80 hectares of orchards. There's a sawmill, commercial and residential properties, even the villages and the local parishes. Here are the facts they do share. Sandringham sits on the North Norfolk coast. Edward VII, then Prince of Wales, acquired it when his mother, Queen Victoria, purchased it as a gift in 1862. Elizabeth II considered it her favorite residence, spending Christmas and part of winter there every year. King George V died there. King George VI died there. It was the last home Queen Elizabeth knew before she passed at Balmoral. The estate generates income through farming and tourism. 8 ground floor rooms are open to the public, along with 60 acres of gardens and 600 acres of parkland. Only during specific months when the family isn't in residence. Here's what they don't publicize: the full scope of property on the estate. According to property analysts, there are at least 24 properties on the Sandringham estate itself. The main house, 23 smaller buildings, at least 21 of which appear to be residential. Some are split into multiple apartments. There are 300 rental properties across 13 villages in Norfolk, both commercial and residential. The estate value? Conservative estimates put the land alone at £200 million. That's before you count the buildings, the main house, the rental income, the commercial operations. When Charles inherited it from Elizabeth, did he pay 40% inheritance tax like everyone else would? No. Royal property transfers between monarchs happen through special arrangements under a 1993 agreement. The public isn't entitled to the details. The limited public access isn't about security alone. It's about maintaining mystique. If people really saw the full scale of Sandringham, really understood the wealth it represents, the normal family Christmas narrative becomes harder to maintain. Balmoral Castle, Scotland's 50,000-acre fortress. If Sandringham is the family's winter retreat, Balmoral is their summer fortress. 50,000 acres in the Scottish Highlands, purchased by Prince Albert for Queen Victoria in 1852 for £30,000. The numbers are staggering. 50,000 acres is about 78 square miles, larger than the entire city of Cambridge. The estate sits within the Cairngorms National Park, partly within the Deeside and Lochnagar National Scenic Area. There are 7 Munros, hills over 3,000 feet, within the estate boundaries. The highest is Lochnagar at 3,789 feet. The castle itself has about 52 bedrooms, built in the Scottish baronial style from granite quarried on the estate. An 80-foot clock tower topped with turrets, completed in 1856 after Prince Albert demolished the original smaller castle. It's a working estate. Grouse moors, forestry producing nearly 10,000 tons of wood annually. Farmland with managed herds of deer, highland cattle, sheep, and ponies. About 2,000 to 2,500 red deer. Protected habitats for birds, including red grouse, black grouse, ptarmigan, and capercaillie. Here's the public narrative. Balmoral is a beloved private retreat where the family escapes London's pressures. They spend August and September there. Prince Philip loved it. Princess Eugenie called it the most beautiful place in the world, saying her grandmother was most happy there. The Queen died there on September the 8th, 2022. All of that is true. It's also incomplete. Balmoral is open to the public only from April to July. During the family's residence, the entire estate becomes private. The 50,000 acres create a buffer zone larger than many towns. Visitors can see the castle ballroom and some grounds during limited summer months. That's it. What does it cost to run? Property analysts estimate the land value alone at over £480 million. There are 79 buildings on the estate beyond the main castle. Add Birkhall, the 7-bedroom house where Charles and Camilla now spend their Scottish summers, and the numbers climb further. The estate also incorporates the 7,500-acre Delnadampf Lodge estate, which Elizabeth II bought separately in 1978. When Ossie Elizabeth died, Balmoral passed to Charles without inheritance tax. Private property worth potentially over £500 million. Transferred tax-free because of position. There's also what Balmoral represents strategically. Scotland and monarchy have complicated history. Balmoral was Victoria's way of embracing Scottish identity. The tartan, the Highland Games, the deliberate Scottishness of the architecture. It was all about binding Scotland to the crown. That strategy continues. Royal presence in Scotland legitimizes the union. Balmoral is political even when politics is never mentioned. The forgotten and the controversial. 7 miles from Windsor Castle sits a property the royal family barely acknowledges. Fort Belvedere. Built in the 1750s as a Gothic revival folly, upgraded in the 1820s by architect Geoffrey Wyatville. Infamous for one reason. This is where King Edward VIII signed his abdication on December the 10th, 1936. The building itself is Grade 2 listed. About 59 acres of grounds. It sits on the Crown Estate, meaning technically it belongs to the nation. But it's been privately leased since 1955. To whom? The lease history tells a story. Gerald Lascelles, grandson of King George V and first cousin of Queen Elizabeth, took a 99-year lease in 1955. He lived there until 1976. Then it went to a son of the Emir of Dubai. From the early 1980s until his death in 2021, Canadian billionaire Galen Weston and his wife Hilary held the lease. The Westons had close ties to the royal family. They hosted Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip for parties at the fort. King Charles stabled his polo ponies there. The lease terms? Never disclosed. The Crown Estate owns the freehold. The property has pools, tennis courts, stables, extensive gardens designed by Rosemary Verret, worth potentially 30 to 40 million pounds on the open market. Fort Belvedere was briefly considered for William and Kate before they chose Adelaide Cottage. Why pass it up? The historical baggage. Living where Edward abdicated would invite constant questions about duty and sacrifice. Easier to avoid it entirely. But if Fort Belvedere represents what the monarchy wants to forget, there's another property they wish they could erase from recent memory. Frogmore Cottage. Built in 1901 on the Windsor estate, Frogmore became internationally controversial when Harry and Meghan moved in 2019. It underwent £2.4 million in renovations funded by taxpayers through the sovereign grant. The work was necessary. The building had been divided into 5 staff apartments and needed conversion back to a single residence. New wiring, plumbing, heating, structural work. Harry and Meghan moved in April 2019. 10 months later, they announced they were stepping back from royal duties. By March 2020, they'd moved to California. Frogmore sat empty. £2.4 million in taxpayer money spent on a house barely used. The backlash was fierce. Harry eventually repaid the renovation costs in full in September 2020 after their Netflix deal was announced. But questions remained about ongoing maintenance and security costs. After they left, Princess Eugenie moved in briefly, then out. Harry and Meghan retained it as a UK base while living in California. Then in 2023, Charles asked them to vacate entirely. They left. The property now sits empty. 2 properties, different failures. Fort Belvedere reminds the family of their greatest constitutional crisis. Frogmore became their most recent PR disaster. Both are kept quiet for similar reasons. Exposure means discussing what the palace prefers forgotten. The next generation's estates. The younger royals live differently than their grandparents did. Or do they? When William and Kate married in 2011, the Queen gave them Anmer Hall, a 10-bedroom Georgian manor on the Sandringham estate. Built in the late 1700s, substantial grounds, complete privacy. The couple spent significant funds renovating through the Duchy of Cornwall. They lived there full-time from 2015 to 2017, while William worked as an air ambulance pilot. No official photos of the interior have ever been released. Even basic renovation details remain undisclosed. For the future King and Queen's country home, the secrecy is remarkable. The official line: protecting the children's privacy. George, Charlotte, and Louis can be kids without photographers. Fair enough. Most support that. But Anmer Hall represents more than child protection. 10 bedrooms for 5 people. This is landed gentry life. Traditional aristocratic privilege. The renovation costs came from Duchy of Cornwall income. Technically private spending. But the duchy exists because of hereditary royal position. The distinction between public and private royal money becomes meaningless when the private money exists only because of public office. Compare this to Charles's approach at Highgrove House in Gloucestershire. He bought it in 1980 through the Duchy of Cornwall for £750,000. Today it's worth several million. The gardens are famous. Open to the public by advanced booking during specific months. Wildflower meadows, cottage gardens, organic farming demonstrations. Charles is genuinely proud of them, willing to share in a controlled way. But the house itself? Private. We've seen glimpses in official photos. No comprehensive tours, no detailed accounting of modifications. The privacy is absolute. When Charles became king, questions arose. Would Highgrove transfer to William as the new Prince of Wales? It remained with Charles through some private arrangement. The Duchy of Cornwall exists to fund the Prince of Wales. That's William now. But Charles kept Highgrove, a duchy asset, for personal use. The terms aren't disclosed. Then there's Birkhall, 15 miles from Balmoral Castle, a white Georgian manor the Queen Mother bought in the 1930s. When she died in 2002, Charles inherited it. This is where he and Camilla spend Scottish summers now. Not the massive Balmoral his mother loved. There are almost no photographs of Birkhall. The family releases one or two carefully staged shots every few years. That's it. No interior tours, no documentary access. For a property that's been royal for nearly a century, the information blackout is extraordinary. Birkhall is where Charles and Camilla honeymooned in 2005. It's theirs in a way no other property is. Not connected to Diana, not freighted with history. The secrecy protects that intimacy. The minor royals' mansions. Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, 11th in line to the throne, lives in a mansion at Bagshot Park in Surrey, Crown Estate property. The lease was reportedly acquired in 1999. The Edinburghs have since extended it for another 150 years. Bagshot Park sits on 51 acres. Built 1879. Rebuilt after fire in 1913. The property includes the Indian billiard room, a gift from Indian princes in the 1880s, elaborately decorated with carved wood. The Crown Estate maintains the structure. Edward covers interior maintenance and utilities. What does that split mean financially? The details aren't published. Lease terms are confidential. Compare this to Princess Anne. She doesn't live in a palace. She lives on a working farm, Gatcombe Park in Gloucestershire. 730 acres the Queen purchased in 1976 as a wedding gift when Anne married Captain Mark Phillips. Cost then somewhere between £500,000 and £750,000. Current value over £7 million. Anne has lived there nearly 50 years, raised her children, built her reputation as the hardest working royal from a property most Britons have never heard of. That's how she wants it. The house is Georgian. Grade 2 listed. 5 main bedrooms, 4 secondary bedrooms, 4 reception rooms, a library, a billiard room, a conservatory. Comfortable but not ostentatious. The real asset is the land. 730 acres of working farmland, cattle, sheep, horses. This isn't decorative. It's genuine agricultural business. Anne told Countryfile in an interview that she has to make the estate pay its own way. Quote, "Being able to take on a place like this, for me, I've got to make it work. This is not something that comes free. This has got to pay its way, otherwise I can't stay here." Anne works harder than almost any royal. Over 500 engagements most years. She's respected, rarely controversial. And she runs her home like a business. This is what Charles claims he wants for the slimmed-down monarchy. Anne's been doing it for decades. If 730 acres and 12 bedrooms suffice for a princess, why do others need much more? But here's the complication. Gatcombe was purchased with private royal money. Technically, inheritance tax-free. The property increased from under £1 million to over £7 million. while owned by someone who didn't pay the same taxes ordinary Britons would. Then there's Royal Lodge, the property that made the system look indefensible. 30 rooms, 98 acres in Windsor Great Park, the Queen Mother's former home. Andrew acquired the lease in 2003 after his divorce. The lease was reported to be for 75 years. The rent? Described as peppercorn, essentially symbolic. Andrew refused to leave despite enormous pressure from Charles. Despite the Virginia Jouffre settlement, despite being stripped of military titles and royal duties. He dug in. The lease gave him legal protection until 2078. In 2003, Andrew negotiated his lease and agreed to handle maintenance and renovations. The house needed work. Andrew reportedly spent around $7.5 million renovating, money supposedly from his own funds. Except Andrew's income sources were always murky. His royal income was never substantial. Where did renovation money come from? Some reports suggest the Queen helped. Others hint at undisclosed sources. The funding remains opaque. Then came the scandals. Epstein, the disastrous Newsnight interview, the settlement. Andrew's royal life imploded. Stripped of titles and patronages, he no longer performed duties. He was essentially a private citizen occupying a 30-room mansion on Crown Estate land. Charles wanted him out, offered Frogmore Cottage as alternative, smaller, appropriate, comfortable. Andrew refused for years. Then in late 2025, after further revelations and pressure, Andrew finally agreed to surrender. His lease. He's moving to Marsh Farm, a small property on the Sandringham estate. A significant downgrade from 30 rooms. But for over 2 decades, Andrew held a Crown Estate property, paid essentially no rent, while the public asked questions that were never fully answered. The system behind the secrecy. The sovereign grant was £86.3 million in 2024 to 2025. That's taxpayer money, openly accounted for. The palace releases annual reports, holds briefings, appears transparent. Except it doesn't tell the whole story. Security costs are never disclosed. Classified as national security matters. Estimates range from 100 million to over 200 million annually. Separate from the sovereign grant, paid through Home Office and Metropolitan Police budgets. Every property requires protection when royals are in residence. Sandringham during Christmas, Balmoral for 8 weeks, and Hall when William visits. The costs compound across 30 properties, but we never see the total. Then there's the Crown Estate versus private property distinction. This is where accounting gets deliberately complex. The Crown Estate owns properties worth £15.5 billion, technically owned by the reigning monarch in right of the Crown, but managed independently. Profits go to the Treasury. In 2023 to 2024, that was £1.1 billion, largely thanks to offshore wind farm leases. In exchange, the monarch receives the sovereign grant. Currently 12% of Crown Estate profits. It was 25% until recently, increased to fund Buckingham Palace renovations. That 10-year, £369 million project is transparently accounted. Public money for public building. But the Crown Estate accumulated over centuries through royal position. Land seized, inherited, acquired through the power of being monarch. Calling it independent now doesn't erase that history. When Crown Estate properties are leased to family members, Edward at Bagshot, Andrew at Royal Lodge, terms are negotiated privately. We don't know if they're paying market rates or receiving family arrangements. The duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall are called private estates, but they exist because of hereditary royal position. Duchy of Lancaster provides the king's private income. about £27 million annually for Charles in 2023 to 2024. The estate is worth about £650 million. Duchy of Cornwall funds the Prince of Wales. About £23 million for William. The estate is worth over £1 billion. Neither pays corporation tax. Both exempt from capital gains tax. The prince voluntarily pays income tax on the surplus, but not on capital gains because he doesn't receive the capital. When Charles renovated Highgrove, he used duchy money. When William renovated Anmer Hall, duchy money, technically private spending, but money existing because of public office with tax treatment unavailable to ordinary citizens. Property maintenance is where costs truly hide. Buckingham Palace's renovation is transparently accounted. But Sandringham's constant upkeep, Balmoral's forestry management, Highgrove's organic gardens. These private properties require professional maintenance year-round. The duchies release financial summaries, but not property-by-property breakdowns. We don't know what anything costs. Staff costs are similarly obscured. The official household employs about 500 people. Sovereign grant funded. But what about staff at Sandringham, Balmoral, Highgrove, Birkhall, and all the others? Housekeepers, gardeners, gamekeepers, farm managers, maintenance workers. Hundreds of additional employees whose salaries don't appear in sovereign grant accounting. Added together, undisclosed security, duchy incomes with special tax treatment, unmeasured property maintenance, invisible staff costs, tax-free inheritance. The anti-monarchy group Republic estimates the true cost of the monarchy exceeds £500 million annually. The palace disputes that. Neither can be definitively proven, because the information isn't available. This is by design. The scale of the empire. The sheer scale becomes indefensible when viewed collectively. One family, over 30 properties, billions in combined value. Charles is one man. He can only be in one place at a time. Yet he has access to Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, Clarence House, Sandringham, Balmoral, Birkhall, Highgrove. William has Kensington Palace apartment, Anmer Hall, Adelaide Cottage, and may soon move to Forest Lodge in Windsor Great Park. Anne has Gatcombe Park. Edward has Bagshot Park. Andrew held Royal Lodge for over 20 years on essentially no rent. Major properties for a handful of working royals. The extended family, Beatrice, Eugenie, the cousins, have their own arrangements that rarely make headlines. Meanwhile, home ownership is increasingly impossible for young Britons. Rent consumes 40 to 50% of income in major cities. Social housing waiting lists stretch years. The contrast between one family's 30 properties and millions struggling to secure one becomes stark when stated plainly. Charles took the throne promising a slimmed-down monarchy. Fewer working royals. Reduced costs, modernization. Yet the property empire hasn't shrunk. If anything, the secrecy has intensified, because reducing the portfolio is politically and personally impossible. Sell Sandringham? Unthinkable. Been in the family since 1862. Open Balmoral year-round? Eliminates its purpose as a private retreat. Give up Highgrove? That's Charles's life's work. Each property has defenders, history, justifications that sound reasonable individually. But collectively, they represent a system designed for an era when monarchs ruled rather than reigned. When aristocratic privilege was accepted without question. When the public had no voice in how royal resources were used. That era is over. The property system remains. The future. William faces an impossible situation. He's cultivated a careful image. Modern, relatable, concerned about social issues. He speaks about homelessness and mental health. He presents himself as the monarchy's future, slimmed down, relevant, connected to ordinary concerns. But he's inherited Anmer Hall, has access to multiple palaces. When he becomes king, he'll inherit Sandringham and Balmoral, adding to already substantial holdings. How does he square that with the image he's built? He can't. Not without real change. Real change would mean giving up properties, opening others completely, publishing full accounting, the kind of transparency that would strip away mystique, and probably reduce public support for the system giving his family these privileges. The most likely outcome is continuity. William will make symbolic gestures. Maybe open one property more. Maybe consolidate smaller estates. But the core system will remain. The secrecy will continue. The property empire will stay intact. Because dismantling it would require admitting it shouldn't exist in its current form. The monarchy's property problem may be what ultimately forces the hardest questions. Not scandal, not unpopular individuals, but the slow realization that the system is increasingly difficult to justify in modern Britain's terms. You can't have 30 properties for one family while nurses use food banks. You can't maintain billion-pound estates privately while public services face cuts. You can't ask for public deference while hiding the true costs of privilege. The contradiction grows sharper every year. The palace hopes that by keeping the property empire hidden, by never letting the public see the full scale, they can maintain the current arrangement indefinitely. That worked in Elizabeth's era. She had personal authority to override questions. Charles doesn't have that authority. William won't either. Eventually, probably under a future government facing fiscal pressure, someone will demand full accounting. They'll publish the complete property list, the total costs, the funding mechanisms. When the British public sees it laid out clearly, the conversation will shift. From do we support the monarchy to why do we support this? The properties the Windsors don't want you to know about aren't hidden because they're scandalous individually. They're hidden because collectively they reveal a system of hereditary privilege that becomes harder to defend under honest examination. That's the secrecy. That's the real property problem. And that's why the empire stays hidden. Because exposure would force questions the monarchy cannot easily answer. The funding mechanisms explained. Let's break down exactly how the money flows. Because understanding the property empire requires understanding who pays for what. The sovereign grant works like this. The Crown estate makes money, lots of it. £1.1 billion profit in 2023 to 2024. That money goes to the Treasury, the government. Then Parliament gives the monarch a percentage back. Currently, 12%. Simple enough, except the Crown estate only exists because of centuries of royal accumulation. Land seized during the Norman conquest, properties acquired through marriage, inheritance, confiscation, assets that belong to the monarch in right of the Crown. That phrase matters. It means the king doesn't personally own the Crown estate. He can't sell it, can't pocket the proceeds. But it belongs to whoever sits on the throne. In 1760, George III made a deal. He'd hand over Crown estate profits to Parliament. In exchange, Parliament would fund his household. That arrangement continues today. But the duchies stayed separate. The Duchy of Lancaster provides the monarch's private income. Founded in 1337. 18,400 hectares of land across Lancashire, Yorkshire, Cheshire, Staffordshire, and Lincolnshire. The Savoy estate in central London. Net assets of nearly £680 million. Annual surplus of about £24 million going directly to King Charles. The Duchy of Cornwall provides the heir's private income. Also founded in 1337. Over 140,000 acres across 23 counties. Worth over £1 billion. Annual surplus of about 23 million going to Prince William. Neither duchy pays corporation tax. They're exempt from capital gains tax. The royals voluntarily pay income tax on the surpluses. Voluntarily. That word does a lot of work. Then there's private wealth. The royals own property personally. Sandringham, Balmoral, Birkhall, Highgrove in a complicated arrangement. This wealth transfers between generations without standard inheritance tax. In 1993, the Queen reached a memorandum with the government. Royal inheritances passing from one sovereign to another would be exempt from inheritance tax. The reasoning? The monarch can't choose to sell the assets. They're held for the nation. But Sandringham and Balmoral are private property. They could be sold. They aren't. They transfer tax-free anyway. When Elizabeth died, Charles inherited properties worth potentially 700 million to £1 billion. He paid no 40% tax. An ordinary Briton inheriting the same would owe 300 million plus. That's not scandal. That's the documented legal arrangement, hidden in plain sight. The properties rarely discussed. Beyond the famous estates, there's a network of smaller properties that rarely make news. Adelaide Cottage, where William and Kate currently live, a 4-bedroom cottage in Windsor Home Park. Modest by royal standards, built in 1831, named after Queen Adelaide, wife of William IV. They chose it specifically for normalcy, a smaller home, no live-in staff. The children walk to school nearby. It's the most relatable royal living arrangement in generations. But it was always temporary. Reports now suggest they're outgrowing it, looking at larger options. Potentially Forest Lodge, an 8-bedroom mansion in Windsor Great Park. The renovations are privately funded. They'll pay market rent. Still, the options available to the future king aren't available to ordinary families. Clarence House, the king's London residence before he moved to Buckingham Palace, built between 1825 and 1827. About 120 rooms, now primarily used for official functions. The Queen Mother lived there for 50 years after King George VI died. St. James's Palace, the oldest royal palace in London, built by Henry VIII in the 1530s. Still the official seat of the royal court. Foreign ambassadors are still accredited to the court of St. James's. Princess Anne has apartments there. Princess Beatrice used to. Princess Alexandra, the Queen's cousin, still does. The Palace of Holyrood House, the monarch's official Scottish residence. Different from Balmoral, which is private. Holyrood House is used for ceremonies, state visits, official entertaining in Scotland. It's the historical home of Scottish kings and queens, dating to the early 16th century. Hillsborough Castle in Northern Ireland, the official residence of the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Also, the monarch's official residence when visiting. Queen Elizabeth met the President of Ireland there in 2005. Windsor Castle, everyone knows it. But few know the scale. Over 170,000 square feet. The oldest continuously inhabited castle in the world. About 1,000 years of history. Home to 40 monarchs. The site of Prince Harry and Meghan's wedding. King George VI's funeral. Princess Margaret's wedding. The fire of 1992 that destroyed 115 rooms. The castle underwent massive restoration after that fire. £37 million. Now it's where the king spends most weekends, where the Queen spent increasing amounts of time in her final years. Adelaide Cottage is literally a walk away. Then there's Buckingham Palace itself. 775 rooms. 19 staterooms, 52 royal and guest bedrooms, 188 staff bedrooms, 92 offices, 78 bathrooms. The 10-year renovation project is underway. £369 million. New electrical wiring, new plumbing, lifts installed for accessibility, asbestos removal, the first major restoration since World War II. Is it worth it? The palace argues yes. The building is essential for British soft power, state visits, diplomatic receptions, the balcony, appearances that mark national moments. Critics argue differently. Why maintain a 775-room palace when the king prefers Windsor? The uncomfortable questions. Here's what the palace doesn't want discussed. The collective scale. Looking at properties individually, each seems justifiable. Buckingham Palace is necessary for state functions. Windsor Castle is historical treasure. Sandringham is Christmas tradition. Balmoral is Scottish retreat. Highgrove is personal project. Monarchy Hall protects royal children. Each has a story. Each has defenders. But 30-plus properties for one extended family? That's harder to explain. The maintenance burden. Every property requires constant care. Historic buildings need specialized work: roofs, plumbing, electrical, gardens, security systems, staff quarters. The sovereign grant funds occupied royal palaces. That's around £50 million annually just for property maintenance on official residences. Private properties are funded privately, through duchies, through personal wealth, through arrangements we can't see. Add up 30 properties, even conservatively, and you're talking hundreds of millions in annual maintenance across the portfolio. Who pays what for which property? The public accounting doesn't show it. The security question. Every senior royal requires protection. Armed officers, surveillance systems, secure perimeters. When the king visits Sandringham, security costs spike. When William takes his family to Monarchy Hall, security follows. When Charles retreats to Burke Hall, protection goes with him. Security costs are classified. The estimates, 100 to 200 million annually, are educated guesses. The actual number, state secret. This isn't unique to Britain. Heads of state globally require security. But 30 properties multiply the burden enormously. The housing crisis context. Britain faces its worst housing shortage in generations. Young people can't afford deposits. Rent consumes unsustainable portions of income. Social housing waiting lists grow yearly. One family controlling properties worth billions, largely tax-advantaged. During this crisis creates optics the palace struggles to manage. They try. William speaks about homelessness. Charles talks about housing. Kate visits community projects. But actions speak. And the actions say one family needs 30-plus properties, while millions struggle to secure one. The trajectory. Public support for the monarchy remains relatively high. Around 60% in recent polls consistently approve. Elizabeth's personal popularity insulated the institution for 70 years. Charles doesn't have that cushion. His approval ratings are lower. He's more controversial. The property questions hit differently when asked about him. William is positioning for the future. The Cambridge image, ordinary parents, school runs, modest Adelaide cottage, is deliberate. It's preparation for a reign where the property empire may become indefensible. The slimmed-down monarchy Charles promises would logically mean fewer properties, a tighter portfolio, more transparency about costs. That hasn't happened yet. Andrew held Royal Lodge for over 2 decades, despite public outcry. Properties continue accumulating. Secrecy continues deepening. The most likely future? Slow reform. Symbolic gestures. One property opened more, another sold quietly. The narrative managed carefully. Real change, full transparency, genuine reduction, would require admitting the current system is problematic. The palace won't do that willingly. Change will come when external pressure forces it. A government needing money, a public scandal involving property, a Republican movement gaining momentum. Something that makes secrecy more costly than transparency. Until then, the empire endures, hidden in plain sight, documented but rarely discussed in full. The royal mansions the Windsors don't want you to know about aren't truly secret. The information exists. The properties are on maps. The funding mechanisms are in official reports. What's hidden is the scale, the collective picture, the system that makes all of it possible. And that's what they're really protecting. Not individual properties, but the idea that this level of privilege is normal, acceptable, unquestionable. Once you see the full picture, questions become unavoidable. That's why the full picture is never shown.